Good morning everyone, welcome to my channel. I've had a few people ask me about my pincushion. The little pincushion I use on my craft desk I'm actually made some time ago, and I just created a little sampler that was the alphabet, a little bumblebee, a couple little numbers. I think I was inspired by a pattern that I saw from Bare Roots or Barefoot. It was back in the 90s. When I was doing some quilts with embroidery included in some of the panels. So that's my little cushion. It's not the best because I should have put something firm in here because I then stuffed it full of the polyfill, and the problem is that all the pins actually, when you apply pressure, come through the actual pin cushion and out the back. I don't know if you can see that. So this little thing bites me regularly when I pick it up, so I've got to be very, very careful. Since watching a video connected to the Roxy girls, Sarah and Rachel, everyone's been making a sausage pin cushion a lot longer and doing all slow stitch on it, and they've been using walnut shells, crushed walnut shells. I believe you buy them from pet stores because they use them as a surface to put in a what they call a reptile enclosure for the lizards and etc. to sort of live on. It holds warmth for them. So everyone's been using crushed walnuts, and I believe that's a great solution because not only would it sharpen your pins as you add them into your pin cushion, it would then give a better surface at the back here that they wouldn't come through the back. I still would slip in probably a piece of cardboard just as a little extra protection. So I really should pull it apart, unstuff it and redo it, and then it'd be probably a lot better and a lot safer to use. But anyway, it's probably about 15 years old and I haven't done too much damage to myself. So that's my little pin cushion. Okay, so back to the Jessie panel. I'm wanting to work on the Swan. So I've got a few ideas. I wanted to layer up a heap of lace pieces to create the feathered effect on the Swan. So I went looking for some bits and pieces, and I've got this doily that I've been snipping at that I picked up in an op shop. It's not a heritage piece or anything. It's probably from the 80s when they were mass producing these things. I have used a little bit down here already. And I also found at the op shop a doily a little while ago. It was like a placemat that had this lemon crocheted edge. So I'm thinking about using a little bit of that because I'd like to bring a little bit of yellow into my piece. I find yellow is a really good way of lightening areas up when things are getting quite heavy and moody, especially in flowers. Adding yellow is a really good way of bringing light. It's like when, for example, if you draw an eye, you'll often see there's a little white dot around the pupil. It's the reflection of light, so they'll put a little white dot or a little white shape in there. I find yellow is the same when you're doing embroidery, just sometimes a little bit just lightens it up. So what I'm thinking is using this corner. Now this doily, it too came from an op shop and it's been faded. It's like that's been sitting in the sun. So this is a different color to the original. If you can see the difference, it's quite dramatic. But that's great because now I've got this brighter yellow and then I've got a softer golden yellow. So from the other side here, I've cut off a couple pieces and a piece of that as well from that white doily. So what I'm thinking, I'll show you how I'm thinking of placing it. Then I'll finish the video here and then come back after I've stitched it into position. So I'll sort of just give you a bit of an idea of where I'm starting with it. So that little piece there, I'm thinking of going to the bottom of the swan's neck and then just gently shaping it around the back of the swan. I had thought of just focusing on the wing and building up just in this space, but I just don't think it's enough. I want this to be really over the top and nearly silly, you know, like not logical embroidery, and I think that'll help give it quite a unique effect. So I decided I'd start with the back of the swan. Then I cut this little corner off. I'm thinking I'm going to use the faded side. It's just not as bright, and that's going to be the wing, and I might sort of pinch it in the center there just to take up a little bit of that excess. Plus that'll give it a bit of a lumpy bumpy effect, which should look quite effective. And then I have one of the motifs that you cut out of the center of a crochet doily, which I've used everywhere anyway, so it sort of helps tie it all together. And I'm thinking of using that as the hinge to the wing. So the whole bird is starting to be covered in snippets of lace. Now I will do some more embellishing in the center here, but what I'll do first is I will stitch down these 3 pieces. I will also come around and do the outline of the bird, and I think I will still use our blue and couch that around the bird itself just to outline her. So that'll all be stitched down. I think I'll use probably just blue thread to couch it down. Down here on the X I used white, which gave a unique effect, but I don't think I'll do that again here because it'll sort of blend a little bit too much. So I'll use the blue thread to match this cotton. That'll get the outline of the bird down. I'll have to do something on the beak. I might just do some satin stitch. Not sure what color yet. I might pick up the yellow. We'll see how we sort of go. And then I can embellish the center of this little motif, as I just said. So I'll now stop the video and do that. Before I go, I do need to assess this heart. So whether I embroider it or outline it or use some of our fabric from our Tilda fabrics from these flowers in here, I have to have a little think about that because that's actually tucked in under the bird's feathers there. So I do need to sort that out. We've got a lot of seed stitch to do as well, so there's a lot of work just in this little corner, but we'll see how we go. We can also add some more flowers, but let's just start by getting this lace down to create the feathers and the plumage of our swan. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here and have a little play, and when I come back in a few seconds, we'll see how we've gone. Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm back. Okay, so I've stitched down the 3 pieces of lace that we were just talking about, so they're now secure. I didn't stitch down the very edges of all of them because I sort of wanted the feeling that it was a little bit fluffy like feathers. So I've really just focused my embroidery or my tacking stitch just in the key areas just to secure it, leaving it so that it's a little bit tactile. Now I want to do something quite elaborate here at the hinge of the swan's wing. So I went fossicking through my bits and bobs and I found this little piece of cream hessian. Now it's not lace like we've been working with, it's hessian, so it's sort of going to provide a different texture again. I really like to mix up the pieces I use. So what I've done is I've cut myself a little triangle. Because hessian frays so easily, instead of trying to embroider around that edge to secure it from pulling apart, I've just used a little bit of art glitter glue and just put a few little dobs on the back of it, and that'll sort of help those threads from sort of slipping away. Once it's embroidered down, I don't think it'll fray too much, but just in case, I've just added that. I've then got a little piece of eyelash yarn and cut off about 1.5 inches and just laid that on top and using a few little stitches just secured it. That's going to just add those few little extra fibers around on the piece of hessian. I use a lot of that everywhere, and I've put it in amongst the flowers down here as well just to sort of add that little soft fibery looking feeling. So we'll keep building upon this little piece. I then got another one of the little motifs. This is one that was on the side of a crocheted doily that's the full piece, and then these were like attaching to the full, and then you'd get to the side of the doily, if that makes sense. Around the perimeter of the doily were half crocheted motifs. So I've got one of those as well. I'm going to just place that there. I've still got my needle threaded here, so I'm just going to pop a few little random stitches in there to secure that. Now you can do it straight onto your panel, but I'm just going to pop a few little stitches in now. That way, as I sort of fiddle around and build this up, everything sort of stays into position. It's a shame when you have an idea and you're stitching it away and you're adding it to your masterpiece, and then you look back and you realise that half of it's crooked. So sometimes it pays just to create the little piece in your hand away from it. That way you know everything's going to line up and be perfect when you put the element into position. Okay, so I've just done a few little tacking stitches, a couple in the middle, a couple around that outer edge. Once again, leaving it so that that's real loose and flicky and feathery. So I don't think feathery is actually a word, but anyway, it applies to our Jessie panel. Now the next thing I'm thinking of doing is, we're very cream and we're very whites, and I just think we need to bring in some of the elements that we've been using everywhere. So I've gone looking through my stash and I found a little red satin rosette. These are commercially produced, and I've picked these up at some sewing shops over the years. Now you could make this yourself by all means with some ribbon, and there's heaps of videos out there on how to make satin roses. So that'd be a little bit of fun if you wanted to learn something new. This is just a smaller one, and they've put a little bit of the olive ribbon behind it to create the look of two little petals. So what I'm thinking of doing is adding those three little rosettes, one big one and the little one. This is a little snippet from a braid, which I have used down the bottom of the panel in a few little spots to add some little flowers. So I'm thinking about stitching that in amongst it, just as a little cluster. And then I went looking for a button. So I'm going to add a button as well. I might even add a second one. So I've just got a few soft, clearish white buttons as well. So I'm going to stitch all of those little elements onto that little piece and then attach it to the swan. So I'm sort of thinking that by adding these colours here, it'll just help tie the swan into the piece. Otherwise she may have looked like just this lace blob sitting in the middle of the panel. So we've got our lace, and now I'm sort of bringing in some of the hints of the colours that we're using elsewhere. And it's going to create a lovely little bit of texture. So what I'm going to do now is just pick up that little lace piece again and just start tacking down. Now I haven't changed my thread to red. I've still got white, but I'm using the tiniest little stitches down in amongst the ribbon, so it's not even going to be noticeable that I haven't got myself some red cotton. It's just a case of popping your needle into the folds of the rose, tiny little stitches. It's just enough to hold everything in position. So we'll pop that rose on, which is now secure, and we'll slide on one of the little ones as well. If you are concerned that your stitches will be visible, by all means change your thread to a red one, but I don't think you need to, because you're just using itty bitty little stitches. It's a little bit fiddly, looks like I can't get my needle through there, so it must be quite thick. A couple more little stitches, so that's rose number 2. I hope you can see what I'm doing there. So it's rose number 2 on our little piece. So I'll just bring the needle up over here I'm not thinking too much about their position. All I know is it's going to be a random cluster, so I know it should work. Well, you always hope. And if it doesn't look right, just snip the little flowers off and have another go. Like I said at the beginning of this project, I don't want to overthink everything. There's so many projects we do and we analyse every, is that upside down? Every stage of it, and I think that's a lot of the time why we don't finish things, or they get popped back in the cupboard. They sort of become just too hard, too laborious. So I've promised myself that this is going to be just light and easy and no rules, which I think will benefit me somewhat. There we go. So I've stitched now the 3 rosettes into position, plus that little piece of embroidery, that little floral embroidery. I'm just looking around my desk to find the rest of it. I did pick up online on Etsy at a shop some time ago. There was a few different colours. I believe it's on Alibaba as well. It's sort of popping up everywhere, even in general craft shops, and it's just lovely to be able to snip little bits and pieces off. So if you ever see braids that are floral in different colours, just grab yourself 30 centimetres or half a metre. You don't need a lot. Okay, so that's those. Let's have a look at these buttons. Yeah, I think we'll pop a button down in that bottom corner. Now, being a button, you can have a lot of fun with buttons. I tend to secure them first with the thread so that I know they're not going anywhere, but then you can come back with some embroidery cotton, like a red or even a blue, and rethread your needle and do like a little treatment in the actual button so it looks like your blue or your red thread's actually holding the button on, but of course you've already secured it with your needle and thread. So I'm liking that. I'm going to finish off my needle here with a little knot because I sort of have run out of thread, and I think the next button that I want to put on is going to actually be on the panel itself because I don't have a lot of room left on my little cluster. You see, can I get that to the camera? Oh gosh, let's just start again and come straight up. There we go. So I've got my little triangle of hessian, a little bit of fibre behind, the 3 little rosettes, the little bit of embroidery and a button. The next button I think will sort of sit down here, but that's in midair, so that will be directly onto the panel. So I'll rethread my needle. I will pop that into position on the panel, add a few little stitches so that it's secure, and then I'll start adding some additional buttons. I'm just looking to the side here, and I might grab a couple more, and they might even come down. Oh, I don't like that one. That's a big white looking blob. That doesn't look right. So I'm thinking we need to stay with the clear see-through-y buttons. That's a bit big, so they need to be small. I just wanted to also mention the rule of 3. It's been a rule around that everything has to be in even numbers, lots of 3s or 5. I'm starting to think that it doesn't matter because there's so many times where I've gone, oh, the rule of 3, I better add another button or I better add another flower. And sometimes it just doesn't look right. So I know anyone who's studied design will have probably done a full assessment of study on the rule of 3. But I don't know, with embroidery, it's sort of, I think it really comes down to your piece. So if you're doing something and 2 buttons or 4 buttons is what you put in place, that's fine. If it looks good to you, it's perfectly fine. So don't feel the pressure of you must adjust a design to make sure you have the rule of 3. I'm starting to wonder if the rule of 3 actually really needs to be considered. I think it comes down to the design of your piece and the space that you're working in, and sometimes you just have room for 2 things. So don't don't beat yourself up if you believe that you're not sort of following the rules of design, because I think design is very fluid. Now I'll get off my little soapbox here because, you know, the next piece I do, I might have threes everywhere. So you just sort of have to go with the flow with embroidery, I think. So I'll stop here and I will secure these pieces. And then when I turn the camera back on and join in, I'll have done, I believe, a lot more seed stitch, and I'll finish the beak. I'm definitely doing a satin stitch there, and I'm going to try and match a yellow that matches this here, so a soft lemony yellow. And I will have done something with this heart. So I'll leave it at that. There's many hours of seed stitch now, so we've got our swan pretty much nutted out and stitched it down, and the next is just working on that background of seed stitch and yeah, adding more and more stitches. All right, I will leave it at that and I will be back shortly. Bye-bye. Okay, hello everyone, I'm back. A day and a half has gone by since the last little section. So this is sort of the completion of my swan and a few other little bits and pieces I've completed to sort of finish this corner of our panel. So nothing really changed with the swan. I just stitched it all down, made that little cluster and attached that as well to the swan. I did add some little buttons around the flowers. There's 4 little buttons there. And then in the process, there was some little blue dots between the X's. So I carried along there with another 3 buttons. And then I noticed that this X was sort of half under the lace. So I decided to actually complete it as well in the same manner as these. So the 4 X's are now done. And it was the blue crochet cotton with some cream cotton couching it over. So I got that nice little stripy look. Then I started the seed stitch. My goodness, I have spent hours and hours on seed stitch. So I've come right along the bottom of the swan until I got to the stem of hessian here, this twine. So I've seed stitched all in around there. And I mentioned in a previous video that I had just sketched in some little floral shapes here, and that I wasn't going to seed stitch in them just to create a little bit of texture. So I've used a red DMC stranded cotton, 3 threads. I think the color was 221. It's sort of a mulberry red, or a raspberry red, sorry, not mulberry, and then couched with some cotton over the top. So it's given us this real little red and white striped little shape. I might do something in the center at some stage, but at the moment that's just a little area I didn't want to put seed stitch. And there was a couple more up here around the swan. I've couched the swan in the blue cotton as well, and then using blue thread, the same color, just normal sewing machine cotton, I've couched it as well. I didn't want to highlight the swan too much. I thought it looked more elegant just in the simple blue. And then for her beak, using a lemon yellow, just a little bit of satin stitch in there to highlight her beak. I will do a French knot in the eye. I just haven't done that yet. So that was all I sort of did to the swan. I really just outlined her and then let the lace and the little cluster here become the feature of the swan. So as I bring it back down, I then did a treatment on this heart that was here. I went around the outside with the blue cotton and then couched it down with some of the machine normal thread just to hold it into position, and it was the same color as the blue, like the swan. I didn't want to make it a big feature. I then cut a piece of our fabric out slightly smaller than the heart itself, and then using the red raspberry DMC stranded cotton 221, did a rough stitch around the outside. It's not blanket stitch, it's just a stab stitch or a overcast stitch. And then just to add a little detail, I just sketched in a little heart in the center there and just did some back stitch to just give it a little subtle detail. really happy with the way that came up because it's picking up on the little red tufts that are in the flower vine. It sort of also matches the little heart, the little floral spaces that are in amongst the seed stitch. I then seed stitched above the swan and worked my way up through the actual tree itself, and that just took hours and hours. But, you know, I just sat there, watched a couple movies, chatted to the hubby, and it was quite surprising just how quickly I covered the area. So the seed stitch now is from the skirt, which I'll just lower that down. Sorry to try and get all this in shot. I sort of want to show you detail, but also bigger screenshots. So I've sort of come from the skirt now all the way down to the bottom of the panel, and the branch or the stem of the big main flower is sort of the side boundary. So I feel quite accomplished there that we've achieved all of that, and I'm loving the look. I might just bring that seed stitch up to the camera a little bit more so you can see the effect it gives when it's sort of tucked in around your work and then not in certain places like the swan's head and that little flower. So you get quite a gorgeous little effect. There is a little cross here, and I just got some satin ribbon and just did a couple little stab stitches just to fill the little cross. So I'm pretty happy with the way it's come up so far on the corner. And I guess the next stage is, where do we go from here? We've got a couple options. We can stay in this zone and do something with this flower. I keep looking at it and I'm just not sure what I'm going to do there yet. So unless something comes to me very quickly, I might actually go elsewhere on the panel just to sort of move away from this zone. I've got a couple options I'm sort of thinking about, that every little petal within this is something, whether it's beads, satin stitch, French knots, colonial knots, sort of like a collage of everything I can think of to fill in a little spot. So it could have a little bit of lace. I'm just not sure if I want to go to that detail. I'm not sure if that'd just look like a big mess, a big blob. So I'm still sort of thinking about that. The leaves will be quite simple. I've got a couple options. I can place some fabric in there and just stitch it all down, or I can outline it and do something inside. It'll be a combination of either what I did on the tree or what I did up here on the flower, where it was just a little less of the embroidery. So I'm just not sure. But anyway, we'll leave it at that, and my next video will be somewhere on this panel, just not sure where. Okay, thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.